Today we're going to give the Pikachu and Eevee line a Paradox form. This is the last part of the Paradox Starter series, so if you haven't seen those videos, I recommend checking them out after this one. The first Pokemon we're going to transform is Pichu. The goal for this form was to make him look a bit more wild. That's why we used the spiky-eared Pichu as reference. I've always liked that form, so I thought it would be cool to bring it back. We then started out by extending his cheek pouches by giving them some fur. We also added small teeth to his mouth and we made his toes look a bit more feral. After that we gave him some chest fur where we put in 3 spikes to add a bit more color into the design, and we made his tail a lot hairier as well. I didn't want this piece to be asymmetrical, so we copied over the spikes from one ear to the other. The last thing we added was the makeup next to his eyes. I've spent a bit more time studying the real Paradox Pokemon, and I noticed that each and every one of them has this detail. It also really helped to portray his other typing, which is fire. Fluffy Sparks, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon appears to be unskilled in controlling his fire energy. Any kind of shock causes it to release this energy spontaneously. However, it is capable enough to control their electricity, unlike Pichu. I really think the makeup added just the amount of extra Paradox feeling our designs were lacking. I will definitely be using this on all the other past forms from now on. Our second transformation is for Pikachu. This was quite an easy transformation, since we now have a guide to follow. We began by bringing back the fur on the ears, but because of it being an evolution, I decided to make the fur a lot bigger. We then extended his cheeks again and we gave him another set of chest fur, this time with 4 spikes instead of 3. My idea for the tail was to make it completely black, like we did for the first form, but you weren't able to see the difference between the ear anymore. You might be thinking that we could just fix that with shadows, but since the color of the fur is so dark, you weren't even able to see the shadows. This made me opt into the yellow color, with only the base of the tail being black. This solution wasn't even that bad, because the original design does the same thing, only with a brown color instead of the black one. Static Cheeks, the Paradox Pokemon. When this Pokemon is angered, it immediately releases all the energy it has in its body. This results in a huge electrical fireball, which can be seen from kilometers away. They do tend to live in groups, where they fight each other in order to survive, which makes these areas extremely dangerous. I am actually quite happy with this line so far. It's very basic, but all the small details together make up for a pretty interesting design. I'm especially in love with these eyes. They're gorgeous. The third transformation is for Raichu. This design was a bit different than the one for Pikachu. Raichu has a few elements who differ quite much from the first 2 stages, so we had to see how we could implement those features back into this piece as well. We started out by adding another set of fur on his cheeks and we gave him cute little teeth. His ears had an interesting shape, so I wanted to make sure not to stray too far away from them. This is why we kept the same shape, but just added the fur on the top and the bottom. After those changes, we added some fur on his tail and we made the tip a bit spikier as well. The last thing we had to do was bring back the fur coat and of course the small flames next to his eyes. We did decide to change up the color palette a bit more in order to fit our wanted typing. Fiery Blitz, the Paradox Pokemon. When this Pokemon gets fully charged, its fur stands straight up and it's ready to release a devastating blast of energy. It appears that this Pokemon gets extremely aggressive when he has too much energy flowing through its veins. Luckily, it can release some of this energy through its tail. I am very proud of this line, and it really shows that we never stop improving with these pieces. They aren't my favorite designs that I've made yet, but they are the most realistic past Paradox forms we have made. For our fourth transformation, we're going to take care of Eevee. I wanted to do something special for this guy. I wanted to keep the option open for the Eeveelutions to either be a past or a future form. I could have done this by making 2 separate Eevees, but I thought it would be cooler to make an Eevee which is both. I decided to use the Gigantamax form of Eevee for this piece because I instantly saw potential in it. The first thing we did was add some teeth onto the design and some angry eyebrows as well. The next thing we did was add all the robotic features to the bottom half of the Pokemon. I did struggle a bit on deciding what to do with the tail, but we eventually settled on a simple design where we segmented it through the middle. The last changes we made were some spikier ears and more fluffy eyebrows. It was then time to put in the colors, which were pretty easy to decide on. We did play around with the idea of the lighted area being in a rainbow color, but I decided that would be too overly designed, so we settled on a plain orange color. Chrono Hybrid, the Paradox Pokemon. It is unknown how this Pokemon came into existence. Some say it was born from an Eevee, exposed to the unique radiation of the other Paradox Pokemon. This Para-Hybrid Pokemon is extremely friendly towards any trainer it encounters. It doesn't appear to evolve by just the evolution stones like Eevee, but it seems like it needs a combination of items in order to evolve. We've been doing a lot of tests to see which combinations are working, so let me go over the requirements in the next section. One of my viewers had the cool idea that this Pokemon would not just evolve by regular stones, but with an extra item, and I think that would be perfect for the games. Shout out to Gemini, by the way. I do want to mention that the shiny for this piece was quite funny, since you can't see the difference between the halves. We know that future forms always have grayed out shinies, but let that just be the color of regular shiny Eevee as well. The fifth transformation is for Leafeon. At this point we had laid out a few design conventions that had to come back for these evolutions. All the past forms would need to have eyebrows and makeup under the eyes. I also added nails to those conventions because I thought it would help them stand out more. We decided to give this one long and elegant eyebrows because I thought it would be a great fit for it. This was also the piece where we decided that we wanted to give all the unused typings to these Pokemon. This will be a grass bug type, because there isn't a bug evolution. I didn't want to use typings twice, so if we used one, it was out of the typing pool. Since this Pokemon is supposed to be a bug type, I did have to add a few of those features into the design. My take on that would be the antennae with the light orbs at the ends of it. I placed them on the top and bottom of the face to make it look extra alien-like, which helps a lot since some bugs do kinda look like aliens. We also added an armor-like belly patch in order to give an exoskeleton look. The colors I used were slightly darker and saturated because I felt like that would fit the bug typing. Luminous Veil, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon seems to prefer night over daytime. The orbs at the ends of the antennae illuminate in the dark in order to lure in potential prey. It leeches off of them when captured and prefers to keep its prey alive and lets it go after feeding off of it. This meal does leave an invisible mark on the prey, so it can easily be recaptured when Luminous Veil is hungry again. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Leaf Stone on Chrono Hybrid whilst holding on to Silver Powder. I am extremely happy how this piece turned out, because I feel like you can see both of the typings very clearly in the design. Our sixth transformation is for Glaceon. I quickly want to go over the design conventions for the future forms as well. Those are a bit easier to follow, because they only need the segmented legs and fingers, the rubber patch on their bellies, 2 lighted stripes on their legs, and if they have a tail, it needs to be segmented with connectors in between of the segments. That is basically what we did for this piece, and it resulted in a very cool looking Pokemon. Icicle, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon tends to hang out around poisonous swamps, taking sample of the poisonous contents and experimenting on its effects on plants. It uses its needle-like headpieces to inject said samples into its targets. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using an Ice Stone and Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a poison barb. When I was making the shiny, I noticed literally nothing changed. In order to make a shiny that would be loved, instead of a terrible one like some real Pokemon have, I decided to use a dark metallic color instead of the light ones they usually have. You guys have supported this series so freaking well, but still only less than 14% of you is actually subscribed. I know it's annoying to be asked to subscribe, so let me make it up to you. I've already said I was going to do the legendaries and mythicals, so if you guys get us up to 10,000 subscribers before the end of July, I will do all the pseudo legendaries as well. Thank you so much for the support, And let's continue. The 7th transformation of today is for Umbreon. We decided on a dark ghost typing for this one, so we had to figure out a way to make that work. We started out with the basic additions of adding more fur onto the ears, tails and eyebrows. I did play around with moon crescents as eyebrows, but that just looks stupid, so we didn't use that. The biggest other change we made was to make his front legs translucent, as if this Pokemon is floating between the spirit realm and the physical world. We then just added in the claws, added even more fur onto his body, and we changed his rings into spiky ones. Even though a pinkish color for the front legs would have looked a lot more ghost-like, we had to stick to the original color palette. Darkened Fate, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon likes to hunt unsuspecting trainers under the covers of the night whenever possible. While that can be seen as rude, they just want attention because they're seen as a bad omen. Most people are thought to stay clear of it. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Moonstone on Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a spell tag. I think Umbreon is one of the cooler Eeveelutions, and I do think this form looks just as cool, if not maybe a little bit cooler. Our 8th transformation is for Espeon. This would be a psychic rock type, which is quite difficult to add into a future form. I thought about a lot of concepts, but adding literal rocks into the design would be something for a past form, not a future one. Someone then suggested that we could just use crystals instead, since some rock Pokemon use this feature as well. We added them on the legs and we made a few extra ones on her forehead. I must say that this piece looks way too flat, so if you have any ideas how to make it look better, let me know. Iron Kinesis, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon focuses its psychic powers through the gemstones on its forehead and legs. It can pick up rocks and large boulders to clear out paths for both it and its trainer. It has a rivalry with Darkened Fate, as their ghostly scares distract this Pokemon concentration, causing its psychic powers to falter. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Sunstone on Chrono Hybrid whilst also holding onto a Heartstone. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of this piece. It's the only bad one of all my Eeveelutions, so the next pieces will make up for it. Up next is the transformation of Vaporeon. We started out by bringing back the eyebrows in a water drop shape, and we also gave it the makeup under the eyes. We then tried to extend the spikes on its back to fit the dragon typing more, but I didn't like how it looked, so I removed it. After that, we added in the claws, and we also gave him a rough belly patch. I disliked the fin around the neck of regular Vaporeon, so I wanted to change it up for my piece. I took big reference from our Eevee form, and we used the same neck fur we used on that piece. This gave me a new vision for this design. We made the fins on his head look a bit more spiky, and then added the same fur on his fins at the end of his tail. We also gave him a scaly back piece, and we added some scales to the design in general. For the colors we used a slightly more vibrant variant, and we played around with the yellow eyes for a bit. I asked my community if they wanted me to give all the past forms yellow eyes, just like the real designs have, but they voted for unique eyes for every drawing, so we changed it up a bit. Raging Rapids, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is a semi-aquatic carnivore that nests in low temperature, dark, underwater or land caves. Depending on the available food, they will decide whether they will nest on the water or on land. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Waterstone on Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a Dragon Fang. I prefer this design so much over the original Vaporeon. I just love the balance between looking cute and menacing. And yeah, the shiny looks fire as well. The 10th transformation is for Jolteon. This will be an electric fighting type. I had a few ideas to make that secondary typing work, but I knew it would be a challenge. My first changes were some power bracelets on his legs, as if he's holding himself back during training. I then got the idea to add a jaw like the one from Iron Thorns. I did this because I didn't want to make the same mistake we did for Espeon, not changing enough. It would also help a bit for the fighting type, because we could just say it uses it a lot when fighting. We also added back in the lights on his legs, and we played around with the tail, since that was what we used on the other forms. The tail looked very weird though, so we decided to eventually remove it. I did feel like the design wouldn't have enough lighted parts without it, so we brought in some solar panels under his chin. These look a little bit like fighting gloves from far away, which helps for the typing. The last change we made was making all the fur blocky. People did tell me it looked a bit like Five Nights at Freddy puppets, so I decided to use a form of shading where it would look even more menacing. Iron Jawlock, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon has built-in solar panels which convert sunlight into a lot of energy. This makes him able to stay awake for days on end. It also has a built-in vent in his mouth that keeps it from overheating. This Pokemon loves to hang around in abandoned restaurants where it scares off anyone who enters. The only way to get this Pokemon is using a Thunderstone and Chrono hybrid whilst holding on to a black belt. Our 11th transformation is for Flareon. This was a very fun drawing to make, since we had to combine the fire and ground typings. The first thing we did were the eyebrows, of course, and we brought back the claws. We then had the idea to give him a clay neck color instead of the fur he usually has there. I did this because we wouldn't have enough ground type features otherwise, and I was going to make almost all of the fur into flames, which would have looked weird on his body there. We did make some flames come out of the collar for the concept that it does have flames under it. We then added the makeup onto his face, and we made sure to make it look blocky for another ground type reference. Since we were going to make most of the fur into flames, but not for the eyebrows, I thought it would have looked weird that only the eyebrows had fur. That's why I added it onto the tip of the ears, and it worked out perfectly. The colors were the same for the body, and the rest was based off of ground type colors. I was a bit scared to render out the flames, but luckily I had enough practice on our Charizard form, so it was actually pretty easy. Volcanic Clay, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon lives near volcanoes, where it collects firestones to add onto his color. These firestones are necessary because they are highly heat resistant and are capable to keep most of the explosive firepower of this Pokemon contained. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Firestone and Chrono hybrid whilst holding on to Soft Sand. This piece looks absolutely fire. Literally. I am very happy with how it turned out. And that shiny looks so cool. For the final transformation of today, we're going to take care of Sylveon. This would be a fairy flying type, but I didn't want to go too hard into the flying aesthetic. My path for this piece was more to keep it looking very similar as the regular form, but with the right amount of lore, it would be capable of flight. I wanted to make sure that this piece wouldn't look like Espeon, because you know, Tony Stark always learns from his mistakes. And I do too. This is why I added a lot of those robotic features, and instead of giving him an entire mask of blackness, I just made the eyes emulate a hole where the screens would be. The other big changes were basically just some repeated steps of segmenting all the ribbons, which would be the way for this Pokemon to fly. I think this has to be my favorite future form. Okay, maybe after Swampert. Iron Pixie, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is as adorable as they say, but it's also a skilled acrobatic flyer. They are able to use their ribbon-like extensions as wings and can reach very high speeds while doing so. The only way to get this Pokemon is forming a perfect bond with Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a sharp beak. Let's go! This was the final starter we had to make, and it's a banger as well. This was an incredible journey, and also the last 12 Fakemon to finish up all the 93 starters as Paradox Pokemon. I highly recommend checking out the other videos if you haven't seen them yet. Let me know which one was your favorite, and goodbye.